Last time we finished up the actual creation process within NIM. So we went from having our list of users that need to be created over to actually setting up our mapping, setting up our scheduler, and getting those accounts created into our Active Directory OU. This video, what we'll look at is creating another filter to handle when a user's information may update. So we'll make some changes in our CSV. We'll make a filter to capture that information. We'll set up another mapping to handle updating those particular attributes, and then we'll get all of that added back onto our current job and our existing scheduler. All right, so first off, let's go back into our CSV here, and I'm just going to change a couple of users' job titles, and then maybe I'll change one of their first names to update, like say a nickname. So we'll do a couple of changes here inside the file, and then we'll go back and look at the actual filter here in just a moment. All right, so I've made a couple of changes to some job titles as well as a first name. We've dropped Christopher down to Chris. We'll go ahead and get our file saved here, and let's get this now imported back into NIM. So in general, I always like to refresh all of the systems just so we have them. So I'll do Active Directory as well as our CSV here. All right, so we have our data refreshed from our systems, and so what we want to do is, again, kind of follow down the left side of NIM, and the first thing that we want to do is set up our new filter. Now, in our case, what we're doing is we're looking for any of the accounts or any of the users in our file that already have an Active Directory account, because those are the people that we want to evaluate and we want to keep in sync. So instead of creating from scratch, what I'm going to do is actually copy the existing AD create, and we'll just rename this guy. Instead of create, we'll do update. So we'll change the name, and let's go ahead and edit this filter now. So we already have our filter specification, and we can even run this as well. There's no records to be shown because we don't have any users that still need to be created, right? So even though we changed the name, nothing has actually changed inside the filter or the logic of this filter. What we need to do now is, instead of looking for the employee users that don't have an Active Directory account, we need to find the employee users that do have an Active Directory account, right? And we only want the ones that do. So we'll change that from a no AD account to any Active Directory accounts, which means that this record needs to have a record in this table. So we'll hit save really quick, run filter, and there's our 7 users. Now, in terms of other data that we'll need, right? So if you remember back in the, I believe the second video, what we did was we actually chopped this filter result down so that we only got the records, or we only got the columns that we actually needed to be able to create a new user. In our case, what we need to do is also include their Active Directory information now again. So we turn that off in the create, we need to turn that back on here inside the update so that NIM will have a reference. We'll know, in our case, what the object GUID is for that particular account that it needs to update. And we also have a reference to see what does their AD account currently look like versus what does the source data look like. So again, we'll go to column selection here, and I'm just going to check all of our records or all of the attributes to come back inside of our filter. So we'll go back to data, again, hit save, run filter, and now we have a number of other columns here inside of our data set. So we can actually see that Ashley Johnson here is associated to this object GUID, and here's the distinguished name for their AD account, right? So we've now joined these two data sets together. Now, in the case of the update, we don't actually have to do any kind of logic inside of our filter that says, find me only the people that have, a different job title or have a different department or first name, whatever it might be. Instead, we can think of this as just being kind of like a master data set. And what we'll do is when we load this data into the mapping will actually do that evaluation for us. So we don't need to kind of define out those particular attribute checks or that particular logic inside of the actual filter. This is meant to just give us a list of data to work from. So our filter is done. Let's go ahead and jump all the way down into mappings. And instead of duplicating this one, we'll actually need to create a new one because it's going to have a different function, right? We're not going to be creating accounts. We're going to be actually updating accounts. So we'll click add again. We'll go to Active Directory for our system. Again, user objects is what we're trying to change here. And then for function, rather than create, we're going to choose update. And again, I'm going to stick with the same kind of naming structure here, and we'll do employee AD user update. All right, so once we click save, we're taken into a familiar screen. So this is going to look almost exactly the same that we saw inside of the create mapping. So up at the top, what we need to do is, again, start with our filters. So we'll select our update filter, and here on the left, we'll see that all of those columns are populated. I'm going to go ahead and select over to a user so we have some values to look at. Now, in our case, when a user is updated, I don't want to regenerate their names and I don't want to regenerate their password, right? So we can leave these guys blank, and we're also going to leave some of these attributes blank over here, right? We don't need to update every attribute every time. We don't need to keep all of these things in sync, especially things like SAM account name and UPN, right? We don't want those to change. And just like we saw with the create, what we'll do now is start pulling data points over from the left side over into the attribute. Now you'll notice that in the case of the update, we only actually have one required attribute that needs to be populated, the object GUID. And this is important because this is going to tell NIM, how do we know what object we're actually changing inside of Active Directory? So here we have our object GUID coming back from Active Directory. I'm just going to grab that first, get that tied over. And now what we can do is pick and choose which attributes that we want to keep in sync. All right, so what I've done is I've set up a couple of attributes that we want to keep in sync. So our description here, our given name, so just our first name, and our job title. Now I've also included the enabled flag, and this is just to make sure that all of our accounts that are active inside of our data source, those are going to be kept active inside of Active Directory, just in case somebody gets disabled by accident. Depending on your environment, you may have a number of other attributes here. So if you wanted to sync over or keep other values in up to date or whatever, you could certainly add those in. So in this case, I'm skipping the SN field. So I don't really care if somebody's last name changes. I only care if their first name changes. Now we'll go ahead and hit save, and we'll go over to the Run tab again, just like we did in the Create. Now, what we're seeing here is a little bit different layout. So we have some attributes here that are actually bolded for us. And what's happening is NIM is automatically taking that template that we've just created, that mapping, and it's evaluating the differences that we say in the template versus what their Active Directory account currently looks like. So what we're seeing is that there are 3 users that have had changes. We have 2 people that have a change of title, and we have 1 person that has a change of their given name. Now I can actually double click on these records and see what is this changing from. So in this case, this user is changing from a director to the VP of engineering. And then same thing here for Oscar, systems analyst is moving up to systems analyst 2. And then for Chris, we're changing from Christopher to just Chris. So again, depending on the attributes that you've chosen, you'll see a difference here, in terms of the kind of rendered result. But what's important is this is actually showing us what is going to change if NIM were to run this right now. So if this is not matching up to your data, then I would want to go back and validate that, is my data refreshed in NIM? Is my mapping set to the correct fields? And then kind of run through the steps one more time. So now that we have the update mapping ready to go, what we can do is just simply add this into that list of the job actions. So remember, the job is the accumulation of all of the specific events that we need to run and the order that we want to run them in. So I'm going to go into our jobs, where I'm going to edit our employee AD job. We'll go to our configuration tab, and see here we have our create listed still. We'll go ahead and add another one. And again, this is going to be a CRUD action. So this is not groups or anything like that. This is going to be either a create or an update or disable/delete. So we can go ahead and select CRUD as the type. And then for name, we'll select our update. And I'm going to leave the threshold at 10. So again, our data set is actually fairly small. We only have like 7 users in our CSV, but you'd want to change this again, kind of to scale with the size of the environment that we're working with. So we'll hit save. We'll go over to our execution, and we can run our evaluation step again, just to kind of verify that this is going to do what we're expecting. So we still have 0 users to be created. We didn't add new records in. However, if you wanted to try that, that would be a great kind of next step, is go in and add some more records into your CSV, load that into NIM, or just go run the scheduler and see those accounts get created appropriately. And then for our update, we have 3 users that need to be updated, and a total of, in this case, 3 actual fields, or what NIM will call mutations, that need to actually be synced. So 3 accounts for 3 total attributes that need to be updated. And just like before, we can actually jump into this and see the list of that information. So we see that title changing here to VP of Engineering again. So from here, our job is already updated and it's already saved. So we actually don't need to do anything else on the scheduler. The scheduler is pointed at that job. It knows to run it. And what we'll do is actually just go ahead and click the play button. So again, this is scheduled to run automatically, but for our case, we'll go ahead and run it manually. We'll see that information get refreshed again. And then at the end, we'll see the actual execution of those changes. So here we have our 3 users, our 3 objects that were changed, or our 3 attributes that were changed. I can dig in here and see the status of all these. These were successes. And again, we can see that change in things like the VP of Engineering job title. And we can go back to Active Directory. We'll just do a quick refresh and we'll open up Jim Brown. He's still in technology, but if I go to organization, we can see that VP of Engineering job title has been changed inside of AD. All right, so from here, there's a lot more that you can obviously do inside of NIM. The focus of these videos was really to look at what can we set up with a basic set of data, as well as avoiding any kind of scripting. There's a whole layer of JavaScript scripting that you can use inside of NIM to do things like adjust values that are coming from a source system, or maybe even concatenate values together. We avoided things like generating the appropriate OU for a user based off of their department, but that's a great example of where that scripting can come into play. Is I can actually have NIM use JavaScript to decide what OU should a user go into based off their department. The documentation site for NIM is a great option to use as well. So all of the features that we've talked about here in this series, as well as all of the other areas that we didn't touch on, are covered in the documentation site. So I encourage anybody to go look at that for more, fine-grained information on, say, how things like the name generator works, or maybe other items that you can do inside of the filters or within the mappings as well. At this point, we've taken a set of users inside of a CSV. We could very easily modify the CSV as we saw. We could add new records in. We could make changes to some of these values. And have NIM run at whatever frequency. In our case, once a day, maybe it'd be something like every hour, right? So if we have an export, like a CSV being exported from a system, we could have NIM reading that CSV every hour and making sure that any changes to that data was being synced over to Active Directory, any new accounts are being created, all that. Now, some areas that we didn't touch on that are generally part of an account lifecycle automation are things like disabling and deleting accounts when they are no longer active. Now, I think that you could take the existing filters and probably work through that as well. We may see some additional videos come out here in this series to deal with disabling, deleting, maybe even things like adding group memberships as well. But again, those are all aspects that are covered on the documentation site. So I encourage anybody to go read through that and expand on what we've built here inside this tutorial.